Unleash your dark feminine energy. Awaken your inner femme fatale through shadow work and inner child healing to own your sensuality, magnetism, and power. By Seraphine Vale. Introduction. Magdalena stood in a cold stone room in Germany. The year was 1634. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, but inside, the silence was much worse. 3 men sat behind a heavy wooden table. They held pens and long scrolls of paper. They were looking for a reason to end her life. They called her a witch because she knew which roots stopped a fever and which flowers helped a mother sleep. She had knowledge that the men in the village did not understand. In those days, if a woman was too smart or too powerful, people became afraid. The disaster was only seconds away. The lead judge raised his hand. He was about to sign the paper that would send her to the town square to face a fire. Magdalena felt the urge to cry. She wanted to beg for her life. She wanted to play the good girl one last time and promise to never use her herbs again. But something shifted deep inside her. She didn't look down at her dirty feet. Instead, she looked directly into the judge's eyes. She didn't blink. She didn't apologize. She stood with a stillness that felt like a heavy weight in the room. The judge froze. He saw something in her gaze that was not fear. It was power. It was the part of a woman that cannot be controlled or broken. He felt a chill run down his back. He hesitated. That split-second pause was her lucky break. He lowered his pen and looked away. "Take her back to the cell," he whispered, his voice shaking. "I need more time to think." Magdalena did not survive because she was nice. She survived because she stopped trying to be. She used a hidden energy that most people are taught to keep buried. That energy saved her life. Today we call that the dark feminine. It is not dark because it is evil. It is dark because it is deep, mysterious, and often hidden in the shadows of who we are. The invisible woman. Most of us are living in a different kind of prison today. We do not face judges in stone rooms, but we face the good girl script every single morning. This script is like a set of rules we never agreed to follow. It tells us to be helpful. It tells us to be quiet. It tells us to make sure everyone else is happy before we even think about ourselves. We are taught that if we work hard and never cause trouble, the world will eventually reward us. But for many women, that reward never comes. Instead, we feel like the invisible woman. We are the ones who stay late at the office to fix a mistake someone else made. We are the ones who listen to our friends' problems for hours, but have no one to call when we are sad. We are the nice girl in dating who gets ignored or taken for granted. We feel like we are watching life happen to everyone else while we sit on the sidelines. This feeling is a sign. It is a sign that you have been eating from the poisoned apple. In old stories, the poisoned apple looks shiny and sweet on the outside. In real life, the apple is the praise we get for being good and easy to deal with. We eat it because we want to be loved. But once we take a bite, the poison starts to work. It numbs our gut feelings. It kills our big dreams. It makes us feel like we have to apologize just for taking up space. When you live this way, you are only using half of your power. You are using your light feminine energy, the side that is soft, kind, and nurturing. That side is beautiful, but without the dark feminine to protect it, the light side gets burned out. You become a person that everyone uses, but no one truly sees. This book is a map. It is a guide to help you stop being the invisible woman and start being the integrated femme fatale. A femme fatale is not just a character in an old movie. She is a woman who owns her power. She is someone who has looked into the obsidian mirror. The obsidian mirror is a tool for shadow work. Your shadow is the part of you that society told you to hide. It is your anger, your big ambitions, and your deep desires. When you were a little girl, maybe you were told not to be bossy. Maybe you were told that being angry was ugly. So, you push those parts of yourself into the dark. Shadow work is about going into that dark place and bringing those parts back into a light. When you do this, you become whole. You become magnetic. Magnetism is a special kind of power that draws people and opportunities to you without you having to chase them. It is the difference between begging for a seat at the table and having people move over to make room for you the moment you walk in. By the time you finish these chapters, you will know how to stop people-pleasing and start choosing yourself. Set boundaries that people actually respect. Use your darker feelings, like anger, as fuel for your goals. Reconnect with your body and feel powerful in your own skin. Walk into any room with a presence that commands respect. Why this works? You might wonder if this is just a trend. It isn't. The power we are talking about has been around since the beginning of time. We see it in the stories of ancient goddesses like Lilith, who refused to be told what to do. We see it in history, from queens like Cleopatra to spies like Mata Hari. These women knew something that most people have forgotten. You do not get what you want by being the best behaved person in the room. You get what you want by being the most authentic. For hundreds of years, people tried to name this power sin or evil. They did this because a woman who cannot be controlled is a threat to the way things have always been. But we are living in a new time. The old ways of working until you break and saying yes when you mean no are not working anymore. Women everywhere are exhausted. They are realizing that being a good girl didn't make them happy. It just made them tired. The methods in this book are based on history, psychology, and the real-life experiences of women who have made this change. We will use the ideas of Carl Jung, a famous thinker who showed that we must face our shadows to become truly strong. We will look at archetypes, which are like blueprints for different kinds of female power. This isn't about faking it. It is about uncovering the truth of who you already are. Meet Elena. To see how this works in the real world, we are going to follow the story of a woman named Elena Vance. Elena is 32 years old and lives in a small apartment in Chicago. Every morning, she hears the roar of the L train outside her window as she gets ready for her job at a big tech firm. Elena is a junior project manager. She is very good at her job. She is the most reliable person on her team. But Elena has a problem. She is invisible. Last week, Elena spent 20 hours creating a plan for a new project. During the big meeting, a louder colleague took her ideas and presented them as his own. Elena sat there with a polite smile, her heart beating fast. She wanted to speak up, but a voice in her head said, "Don't make a scene. It's not worth the conflict." She stayed silent. Afterward, her boss praised the colleague, and Elena went back to her desk and apologized to her keyboard for being upset. Her personal life isn't much better. Elena recently ended a 5-year relationship. Her ex-boyfriend was a nice man, but he always made the decisions. They ate the food he liked. They watched the movies he chose. Elena felt like a plant that wasn't getting enough sunlight. She was dimmed. Now that she is single, she goes on dates, but she finds herself trying so hard to be likable that she forgets to see if she even likes the other person. Elena is the invisible woman. She is tired of being the nice girl who finishes last. She knows there is something more inside her, a spark of fire that she hasn't felt in years, but she doesn't know how to reach it. As we go through this book, we will watch Elena take her first steps into the shadow. We will see her learn to use silence, to own her beauty, and to finally stop asking for permission to lead her own life. The roadmap ahead. The journey we are taking together has a specific path. We cannot just jump to being a powerful femme fatale overnight. First, we have to clear away the old junk that is holding us back. The foundation. We will start by looking at why the world is so afraid of powerful women. We will learn about the Inquisition of the past and how those same ideas still affect us today. The shadow. We will dive into shadow work. You will learn how to find the gold in your anger and your secrets. You will meet the archetypes of the dark feminine and find out which one is waiting to come out of you. Healing the child. We will go back to the inner child. Most of our good girl habits started when we were very small. We have to show that little girl that she is safe even when she is bad. The tools of power. We will learn the art of silence and how to use your gaze to control a room. We will look at women like Mata Hari to see how they reinvented themselves when the world tried to throw them away. The fortress. You will learn how to build boundaries that keep your energy safe. You will learn to say no without giving an excuse. The coronation. Finally, we will put everything together. You will learn how to live as an integrated woman who is both kind and fierce, soft and strong. This is not a book about being mean. It is not a book about hurting others. It is a book about sovereignty. To be sovereign means to be the ruler of your own life. It means you no longer look to others to tell you if you are good enough. You already know you are. The path of the dark feminine is like a walk through a deep forest at night. It can be a little scary at first, because you don't know what you will find in the shadows. But if you keep walking, you will find that the darkness is where the most beautiful things grow. It is where your intuition lives. It is where your true magnetism is born. Magdalena survived the judge because she found her fire. Elena is about to start looking for hers. It is time for you to find yours too. The obsidian mirror is waiting. Let's begin. Chapter 1. Reclaiming the Power of the Shadow. By December 1913, Carl Jung had exactly 0 allies left in the world of psychology. He had just spent years as the chosen successor to Sigmund Freud, the most famous doctor of the mind in the world. But Jung had done the unthinkable. He had disagreed with the master. He had walked away from the safety of the established rules of the human brain. Now, sitting in his quiet home in Zurich, Switzerland, he felt his own mind beginning to crack. He was 38 years old, and he was terrified. He started having visions of a great flood covering Europe, a sea of blood that rose higher and higher. He wasn't sure if he was seeing the future, or if he was simply losing his grip on reality. He knew he had a choice. He could try to push these scary thoughts away and pretend to be a normal, good doctor. Or he could go down into the basement of his own mind and meet the monsters head-on. He gave himself a deadline. He would either find the source of these dark thoughts within the next year, or he would admit he was broken. What Jung discovered during that year changed everything we know about being human. He realized that every person carries a hidden side. He called it the shadow. He found that the more we try to be perfect, the bigger and meaner our shadow becomes. Jung spent the next 3 decades proving that you cannot be a whole person if you only look at your light side. He showed that the things we are most ashamed of, our anger, our hidden desires, our selfish ambitions, are actually the keys to our greatest power. Jung proved that when we hide our shadow, it doesn't go away. It just waits in the dark until it gets strong enough to take over. He saw this in his patients, who tried so hard to be polite and good that they ended up depressed, anxious, or prone to sudden outbursts of rage. They were living on a diet of what society told them was right, a sweet way of acting that Jung realized was actually a poisoned apple. It looked good on the outside, but it was killing their spirits from the inside out. The basement of the soul. In the early 1900s, the world was obsessed with being rational. Doctors believed that if you couldn't measure it or see it, it didn't exist. They wanted to treat the mind like a machine. If a part was bad, you just ignored it or tried to fix it with logic. Jung realized this was a lie. He saw the human mind as a vast house. Most people spend their entire lives in the living room, where the lights are bright and the furniture is clean. They invite guests over and show off how nice they are. But every house has a basement. The basement is where we throw the things we don't want people to see. It's where we put the unladylike anger we felt when someone cut us off in traffic. It's where we hide the greedy wish for a bigger house or a more powerful job. It's where we stuff the bossy part of ourselves that actually knows exactly what to do but is afraid of being called a bitch. For a woman, this basement is often very full. From the time we are little girls, we are fed that poisoned apple. We are told to be helpers. We are told to be quiet. We are told that our value comes from how much we do for others. This creates a good girl script. We follow the script, we smile, and we say I'm sorry for things that aren't even our fault. Elena Vance knew this feeling all too well. It was 11:00 p.m. in her small apartment in Chicago. The blue light from the L train flickered against her walls as it roared past her window. She was sitting at her kitchen table with a cheap notebook and a pen that was running out of ink. She was trying to do her first shadow work exercise. Earlier that day at her tech firm, a man named Mark had taken her ideas for a project and presented them as his own. Elena had sat there, her heart pounding against her ribs, and she had done nothing. She had actually smiled and nodded when the boss congratulated Mark. She had even stayed late to finish the spreadsheets Mark was too busy to do. Now, she tried to find her anger. She looked at the blank page. I'm just a nice person, she whispered to the empty room. I don't like conflict. But as she sat there, she felt a strange heat in her chest. It wasn't nice. It was a sharp, burning sensation. She realized that she wasn't nice at all. She was just terrified of what would happen if she stopped being nice. She was terrified that if she showed her shadow, the part of her that wanted to stand up and tell Mark to go to hell, people wouldn't like her anymore. She wrote one word in the notebook. Rage. As soon as she wrote it, she felt a weird sense of relief. It was like she had finally opened the door to that basement and realized the monster inside was just a part of her that was tired of being ignored. She realized her niceness wasn't a personality trait. It was a shield she used to hide her power. The Victorian War. This struggle isn't new. In the 1800s, during the Victorian era, the good girl script was at its most extreme. Women were expected to be the angel in the house. They had to be perfectly pure, perfectly submissive, and perfectly quiet. They weren't supposed to have desires, and they certainly weren't supposed to have shadows. But something interesting happened during that time. Because everyone was trying so hard to be light, the culture's shadow started leaking out in other ways. This was the era when Gothic literature exploded. People couldn't stop reading stories about monsters, ghosts, and dark secrets. Stories like Dracula and Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde became massive hits. Why? Because these stories were a mirror. Dr. Jekyll was the perfect Victorian man, polite, educated, and respected. But he had a shadow he couldn't control, which became Mr. Hyde. The public was obsessed with these stories because they felt the same thing happening inside themselves. The more they pretended to be angels, the more they felt like monsters in the dark. For women, the shadow was even more repressed. If a woman showed too much emotion or spoke her mind, she was often diagnosed with hysteria and locked away. Society was terrified of a woman who knew her own shadow. They were terrified of the dark feminine, the version of a woman who isn't there to serve, but to lead, who isn't there to be pretty, but to be powerful. This fear goes back even further than the 1800s. It goes back to the very first stories we ever told. Take the myth of Medusa. She is a monster with snakes for hair, who turns men to stone. She is the ultimate bad woman. But if you look closer at her origin, she was a beautiful woman who was hurt by powerful men, and then punished for it. Her monstrous form was actually a defense. The snakes and the stone-cold gaze were her shadow coming out to protect her. She became too much for the world to handle, so the world called her a monster. Then, there is Lilith. In ancient legends, Lilith was the first woman, created at the same time as the first man, but she refused to be under him. She wanted to be an equal. When she was told she had to submit, she didn't cry or apologize. She simply left. She chose the wilderness over a life where she had to hide her true self. Society turned her into a demon of the night to scare people, but for those who look into the shadow, Lilith is the ultimate symbol of sovereignty. She is the part of every woman that refuses to be small. Finding the shadow gold. Jung had a famous saying, "The shadow is 90% pure gold." Most people think shadow work is about finding the bad parts of ourselves. They think it's about looking at our flaws and feeling guilty. But it's actually the opposite. Shadow work is about finding the strengths we were taught to hide because they made other people uncomfortable. Think about a little girl who is very loud and takes charge of the playground. Adults might tell her she is bossy. They might tell her to lower her voice and let others lead. By the time she is an adult, she has shoved that leadership into the basement. She becomes a woman like Elena, who lets others take credit for her work. Her bossiness is actually leadership gold. Her anger is actually boundary gold. Her selfishness is actually self-respect gold. When you reclaim your shadow, you aren't becoming a bad person. You are becoming a whole person. You are taking the energy you used to spend on hiding yourself and using it to build your life. There is a simple 3-step process to begin this integration. Jung used it, and it's the same path Elena started on that night in Chicago. 1. Identify the trigger. Your shadow is most visible when you are looking at other people. Have you ever met someone and felt a sudden, intense dislike for them, even though they didn't really do anything to you? Or have you ever watched a woman on TV who was bold, loud, and unapologetic, and felt a weird sense of judgment? She's so full of herself, you might think. That judgment is a map. Usually, the things we hate in others are the things we have forbidden ourselves from having. If you hate a woman who is full of herself, it's likely because your own shadow is starving for a little bit of self-confidence. Your shadow is pointing at her and saying, "Why does she get to be seen, while I have to stay in the basement?" 2. Accept the signal. Once you find the bad trait, you have to stop judging it. If you feel anger, don't tell yourself, "I shouldn't feel this way." Instead, ask the anger what it wants. Anger is almost always a signal that a boundary has been crossed. It is your soul's way of saying, "This isn't fair." If you push the anger away, you lose the ability to protect yourself. You realize that the emotion isn't the problem. The situation is the problem. 3. Channel the energy. This is where the magic happens. You don't just let the shadow run wild. You don't go into the office and start screaming at everyone. Instead, you braid the shadow energy into your everyday life. You take the ice of your anger and use it to speak calmly and firmly. You take the fire of your ambition and use it to apply for the job you think you're not ready for. You stop using your energy to keep the basement door locked, and you start using it to power your dreams. The night the shield cracked. For Elena, the realization didn't happen all at once. It happened in small waves. A few nights after she wrote rage in her notebook, she was back at work. Mark walked over to her desk and dropped a thick stack of papers on her keyboard. "Hey, Elena," he said, not even looking at her. "I need these formatted by 5. I've got a lunch meeting." Usually, Elena would have said, "No problem, have a great lunch." Her good girl script would have taken over automatically. She would have felt a little bit of resentment, but she would have buried it under a smile. But this time, she felt that heat in her chest again. She didn't push it down, she let it sit there. She looked at the papers, then she looked at Mark. She didn't yell, she didn't make a scene, she just didn't pick up the pen.
"I can't do that, Mark," she said.
Her voice sounded different to her own ears. It was lower. It was steadier. "I have my own deadlines to meet. You'll need to format those yourself." Mark blinked. He looked like she had just spoken to him in a foreign language. He waited for the "I'm sorry" that usually followed Elena's sentences. But the apology didn't come. Elena just went back to her screen. Mark picked up the papers and walked away without a word. Elena's hands were shaking under the desk, but for the first time in 5 years, she didn't feel tired. She felt electric. She had taken a tiny piece of her shadow, the part that was selfish with her time, and she had used it to save herself. She realized that she had been carrying Mark's weight for years because she was afraid of his judgment. Now, she saw that his judgment didn't actually have any power over her. She had thrown away the poisoned apple of being perfectly helpful. This is the secret that the world tries to keep from women. They tell us that if we are good, we will be rewarded. But the truth is that the world doesn't reward good girls. It uses them. The world rewards people who are whole. It rewards people who know their own worth and aren't afraid to defend it. When you reclaim your shadow, you become magnetic. People can sense when someone is hiding a large part of themselves. It feels off. It feels weak. But when a woman walks into a room and she has integrated her shadow, she has a presence that is impossible to ignore. She doesn't have to shout. She doesn't have to try to be likable. She just is. The courage to be bad. Choosing to look into the shadow is an act of war. It is a war against the expectations of your family, your boss, and your culture. It requires you to be okay with being the villain in someone else's story. If you start setting boundaries, people who used to benefit from your lack of boundaries will call you mean. If you start speaking your mind, people who liked your silence will call you aggressive. If you start prioritizing your own pleasure and goals, people who wanted you to serve them will call you selfish. Let them. The dark feminine isn't about being evil. It's about being real. It's about the fact that nature isn't just sunshine and flowers. It's also the storm, the predator, and the deep dark ocean. A woman who only accepts her light is like a forest that only has trees and no soil. Nothing can grow there. You need the dark, damp, messy parts of your soul to provide the nutrients for your strength. Carl Jung eventually emerged from his year of darkness. He didn't lose his mind. Instead, he wrote a book called The Red Book, which contained all his visions and conversations with his shadow. It is one of the most famous and beautiful books in the history of psychology. He became a man who was deeply respected, not because he was perfect, but because he was so clearly himself. He had a gravity to him that drew people in from all over the world. He proved that the things we fear most about ourselves are often the things that will save us. Imagine a life where you never have to say, "I'm sorry," for taking up space. Imagine waking up and not feeling that heavy weight of resentment in your gut because you've spent the whole day doing things you didn't want to do. Imagine looking in the mirror and seeing a woman who is dangerous, wise, and completely free. This is what happens when you stop running from the dark. You realize the darkness isn't a hole you fall into. It's a tunnel you walk through to find the person you were always meant to be. The basement door is unlocked. You have the flashlight. It is time to go down and claim your gold. The world has had the good girl version of you for long enough. Now it's time to show them what happens when the shadow comes out to play. You aren't losing yourself. You are finally, for the first time, becoming whole. As you move forward, keep that heat in your chest. Don't let anyone tell you it's a sin. That heat is the engine of your new life. It is the fire that will burn away the scripts that kept you small. You are no longer the invisible woman. You are the one who sees everything, especially the power that was hiding in the dark all along. Chapter 2. Why does the world fear a woman in her power? Imagine looking down at a city carved from white marble and sun-drenched stone. From high above, the streets of ancient Athens look like a busy anthill. You see thousands of men in white robes walking toward the center of the city. They are talking about laws, war, and money. In this world, the rules are clear. Men speak, and women stay home. The patterns of life are predictable and flat. But if you look closer at the edge of the crowd, one woman breaks the pattern. She doesn't walk with her head down. She doesn't hide in the shadows of a doorway. Her name is Phryne. She is a woman who has become so wealthy and so famous that she can afford to pay for the repair of the city walls. She is not a wife or a daughter who belongs to someone else. She belongs to herself. To the men in power, Phryne is a problem. They look at her and feel a strange mix of desire and terror. They don't have a box to put her in. She is too rich, too beautiful, and far too influential. She is a disruption in their perfect marble world. Because they cannot control her, they decide to destroy her. The Court of Men. In the 4th century BC, the leaders of Athens brought Phryne to trial. The charge was impiety, which was a fancy way of saying she didn't respect the gods. But everyone knew the truth. They weren't worried about the gods, they were worried about her power. They were afraid of how much space she took up in their minds. The courtroom was filled with hundreds of judges. These were the most powerful men in the city. Phryne stood before them, defended by a man named Hyperides. As the trial went on, it looked like Phryne was going to lose. The judges were cold. They wanted to make an example of her. They wanted to show the city that any woman who grew too big would be cut down. Hyperides realized that words were not working. Logic was not working. He knew that the judges were not acting out of reason, but out of fear. So he did something that would be talked about for thousands of years. He walked over to Phryne and pulled back her robe, baring her chest to the judges. The room went silent. In that moment, the judges didn't see a criminal. They saw something that felt divine. They were struck by a raw, ancient power that they couldn't name. To the Greeks, perfect beauty was a sign of the gods. By showing her true self, Phryne wasn't just showing her body, she was showing her undeniable presence. The judges were so shaken that they acquitted her on the spot. They were afraid that if they harmed someone with that much divine energy, they would be cursed. Phryne walked out of that court a free woman. But the lesson of her story remains. When a woman owns her power, the world reacts with a strange kind of fear. It is a fear that tries to label her as bad, crazy, or dangerous. The safety in smallness fallacy. Why did those judges want to punish Phryne in the first place? It comes down to a mental model that most of us are taught from the time we are little girls. This is the safety in smallness fallacy. This framework suggests that if you stay quiet, stay helpful, and don't make waves, you will be safe. It's a survival strategy that worked for our ancestors, but today, it acts like a cage. The world encourages women to be light, sweet, and easy. When you follow this script, people like you. They find you pleasant, but they also find you easy to overlook. The safety and smallness fallacy has 3 main parts. The invisible shield, the belief that if no one notices you, no one can hurt you. The approval trap, the idea that your value is based on how much you help others. The volume control, the habit of lowering your voice, your ambitions, and your energy so you don't intimidate others. When you step out of this framework, when you act like Phryne and own your space, you trigger a threat response in people who are used to you being small. They aren't actually afraid of you. They are afraid of the part of themselves that they have suppressed. They see your freedom, and it reminds them of their own chains. Elena's night at the edge. Elena Vance stood in the corner of a crowded rooftop bar in Chicago. The air was thick with the smell of expensive gin and the sound of tech talk. This was a networking event, but to Elena, it felt like a battleground where she was already losing. She had spent the last hour trying to join a conversation about a new project. Every time she opened her mouth to share a data point, a male VP from another firm would talk right over her. He didn't even look at her. It was as if she were made of glass. I actually think the user engagement numbers show, Elena started. And that's why we need to pivot to AI, the VP shouted, turning his back to her to hand his glass to a waiter. Elena felt that familiar sting in her chest. She did what she always did. She smiled politely, took a sip of her sparkling water, and stepped back. She felt small.